One of the reasons why I like to talk about WordPress is that it has come a long way for the past couple of years. It has just went into an incredible momentum with the community. It all started with the Gutenberg editor. It was a controversial update to the WordPress core, but it finally made it into WordPress 5 back in 2018, in December 2018, and there's more. There's actually many ways that you can create really modern workflows around WordPress. We all know it has a really bad reputation, and so we'll get to that, and we'll get to that question as well. So what is WordPress? We all know it's a content management system. It is built on the LAMP stack, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, right? So it's a pretty old stack. It's like if I will just throw a number, I would say it's over 20 years old. Right? So a lot of the most experienced web developers that I know started with PHP. It's definitely something that's been around for a long time. PHP is up to version 7, but it kind of went on a nuclear winter when there was I think it went on for like almost 10 years where there was no updates to the programming language. So right now WordPress, and this slide is updated. So it powers over 34% of all websites. The first version was made public in 2003. It started as a blogging platform, and still the core code of WordPress and the core functionality of WordPress still deals with that original idea of a blogging platform. It's not widely used as that anymore because there's other platforms like Medium, and every company wants a piece of that pie. So back then, if you wanted to have a WordPress, you want to have a blog, you would go to something like WordPress right away. Now there's many options. It is an open source. The code base is an open source and is under the GPL license. In 2018, WordPress included the React-based editor as part of its core. Its current version is 5.3. The minimum version for WordPress right now is still pretty outdated. It's PHP 5.6, but the idea is that they're going to bump that up to 7 in this upcoming month.
As in they would refactor all the PHP 5 code?
That is another issue, right? So it doesn't matter that you bump the version if you're not refactoring your code, because you're not taking advantage of the main optimizations of the new version. So there's definitely going to be a lot of work on that. The WordPress versions are being made available really quick. If the idea is to have at least 2 releases every month or something like that. So things are moving really fast. I mean, this went from 5.0 to 5.3 in less than a year. So a lot of really good developments there. So who owns WordPress? So WordPress.org is the organization behind the open source project. But there is a company called Automatic. Who here hasn't heard about Automatic? So that's one of the things that a lot of people don't know. So Automatic is the company behind WordPress.com. So WordPress.org and WordPress.com are different things. WordPress.org is the community that is in charge of developing the WordPress open source project, while WordPress.com is a company it's owned by Automatic, where you can host your website. They have all kinds of WordPress hosting management products, and it's a pretty successful company. Automatic also owns WooCommerce, which is the most popular e-commerce platform out there. Some of you might have heard about Magento. All of those are PHP-based platforms, basically. I mean, you guys heard about the Macy's credit card hack this week? So that was a Magento site. So yeah. Needless to say, the whole PHP. There's a lot of security issues with that. With Magento itself, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But as soon as PHP 7 was released, like that week alone, there were just all kinds of security issues reported. So it's very interesting to see how that develops. Automatic is a unicorn. It's valued at more than $1 billion. It's a great company to work for. Their team is completely remote. And you guys heard of like work camps, for example. They have work camps all over the world. They also have local work camps and national wide work camps. If there's anything that I have to say about the WordPress community, is the most amazing, supportive, inclusive, and diverse tech community out there. I had never felt as strange as a stranger, or as a imposter syndrome, or out of my league in any of these work camps I've ever been in. And I can't say the same thing about other conferences. So it's an amazing community. It's one of the most supportive communities out there. Here's a tip. All WordPress versions are named after jazz musicians. The last version, 5.3, is named after Rashawn Roland Kirk, is an American jazz musician. Who knew that? Right. Okay. So why developers don't trust WordPress? Tons of legacy code. There's not a lot of object-oriented programming, so a lot of the programming paradigms that have been applied in the past 5-10 years still haven't made it into the core of WordPress, but it's actively being worked on. PHP is a mature programming language. Because it's been around for so long, there's more senior people doing it, meaning that the job market is not as well compensated as other technologies like JavaScript or Python. There's a lot of security issues. It's such a popular platform. It's very easy. It's an easy target for malware and hackers. A lack of modern native tooling integrations. You guys know React, Webpack, all that stuff. It doesn't come with WordPress core. And of course, there's a huge ecosystem out there where people can offer their own paid or free plugins, themes. So there's a lot of issues with security there. So one of the things that if I can recommend you is, if you ever want to start your own WordPress site, be very careful what you put on your site, because there's a lot of bad code out there. There are some initiatives about vetting what it gets submitted to the WordPress theme directory and plugins directory, but still, even with things like Google Play or the App Store, there's always a clever way to get around all of that and infect people's systems. And it's a difficult architecture to stage. So it's out of the box, it's really hard for you to have a proper local to staging to development to production environment. But because it's been around for so long, there's a lot of companies that actually offer a lot of products around WordPress development. So I'm sure you guys heard of WP Engine, Pantheon, and all those guys. So there's companies out there that will definitely help you with that. So what is WordPress missing? No multilingual support. So if you want multilingual support, most of the time you have to install a plugin. Issues with debugging, that's this white screen of death. I'm sure if you guys ever develop for WordPress, have you seen this? I think that they fixed that in one of the latest releases. No safeguarding, too much freedom, too much people out there writing for WordPress. Issues with performance, that is a known problem. WordPress sites are known for not being optimized on the front end, so that's on the developer to go the extra mile and optimize all those assets that get served on the front end. Also, there's a lot of tools out there that people can build sites with, like drag and drop tools. Those tools usually don't really offer you an optimized assets for the front end. No native staging or backup system. And again, plugins are not vetted or checked for minimum security. So right now, this is enough for you to walk out of this talk thinking I'm never going to use WordPress. But I'm here to convince you that you should definitely give this a look. What is WordPress for? So WordPress is perfect for editorial sites that require constant updates. Also, WordPress is great for SEO. So if you have a site where you have a internal user base of content managers that are constantly uploading pictures, submitting articles, WordPress is for you, because that's what WordPress was built for. So our site, the company that I work for, is called AECOM. It's a global architecture and engineering firm. So we have 52 content managers all over the world, and these people are uploading content at any time of the day. So WordPress works very well for user management as well. When not to use WordPress. So brochure sites, you don't need to spin up a whole WordPress installation for your portfolio site, and I see this done 1,000 times. Sensitive data. So if you're dealing with anything that has to deal with HIPAA, you guys know what HIPAA is, the medical regulation. A year and a half ago, GDPR came into play, so WordPress had to update had to release a new version that was GDPR compliant. GDPR is the European privacy regulations. Definitely don't use WordPress for convenience. Like, oh, I know how to use WordPress. Let me just plug in, let me just download a plugin or install a theme and just call it a day. That stuff's gonna blow up in your face. Media heavy sites. WordPress as it is, the architecture is very monolithic. The entire application lives inside that WordPress installation. What a lot of people are doing is they are breaking down all those pieces and deploying them in different microservices. So one of the most popular parts of WordPress is the media library. So that's where you upload your images, PDFs, videos, although it's not recommended. You're better off using, like an embedded video player like Wistia or YouTube. But that uploads folder is going to get really big and out of control really quick. So what a lot of people do is they just upload that, they offload that to an S3 Amazon bucket, and they modify the media library, or they just create a plugin so they can manage that way. And kind of build and leave cases. As these security issues keep popping up, there has to be somebody keeping an eye on this WordPress installation. Constant updating, removing stuff that you're not using. So yeah, it comes with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility, right? But it's still a very popular platform. I know the State Department runs all their websites on WordPress. Bloomberg. I know Bloomberg has a bunch of WordPress sites. A lot of media companies. There's parts of New York Times, NYTimes.com that are on WordPress. So it is still being used. It just needs to be used correctly, right? So the road to modern WordPress. WordPress has a RESTful API. Who didn't know that? Yeah, so that just opens a huge amount of possibilities for you, because now you can use WordPress as your API, and then you can build the front end you want. You can build your front end with React, with Vue, with Angular, with Gatsby, with whatever you want, and you just use WordPress as a kind of like out-of-the-box API solution. JavaScript is taking a more active role in core functions, so a lot of these PHP functions are getting converted into JavaScript. I couldn't get the official number, but I think I heard one time like about 60% of WordPress at this point is JavaScript. And don't quote me on that. On the back end. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, minimum PHP version is going to go from 5.6 to 7. More modern tooling. So headless. Headless is basically what I just described, using WordPress as the source of data, and then using a completely different backend somewhere else. Native multilingual support, that's going to be part of the next year release plan. And now, because of tools like Medium, that whole block editing experience, that's what Gutenberg is, basically. It's an improvement to the editing experience on the back end. So that's another thing to note, and somebody asked me this. So right now, the whole Gutenberg editing experience is a React-based application on the back end, not on the front end. So you're not loading React on the front end.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So is that render on WordPress?
It's rendered by PHP. So I'll give you an example of how that workflow works. Yeah. So here's another tip. Usually, when you install WordPress, it comes with themes included, and They usually call 2011, 2014, and on and on and on. A lot of people like to take those themes, and these are themes developed and vetted by the WordPress contributed group, the group of contributors. So these are really good, solid themes that you can, get started on. A lot of people take these themes and they customize them and they create their own. So why WordPress is using Gutenberg? Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Okay, good. Gutenberg, the famous German, cleric that translated the Bible into from Latin to German. I guess he was German, and used the printing press for that, right? So that's what the code name for the project was, and they automatic felt the pressure from the competition from all the digital platforms. They wanted to modernize the editing user experience. They wanted to take the advantage of using React, but there was some controversy. I have a slide about that. And also they wanted to attract people to the WordPress ecosystem by modernizing that backend and making React JavaScript a first-class citizen. They can get guys like you that are JavaScript developers to give WordPress a second chance. So Gutenberg, there was a big problem with accessibility, and a lot of people, felt that it shouldn't have been launched when it was launched because there were issues with accessibility. But all those issues should be pretty much solved by now. It was developed by the community, by the open source community. And it was controversial, still a bit controversial. People thought that if they updated their site, it was going to blow up, right? But none of that happened. There were some issues with also people that created sites with site builders. They were worried that if they updated to version 5, that their site builder codes were not going to work. But that wasn't the case because a lot of those site builders are just basically inserting shortcodes into your page, and Gutenberg never had a problem with shortcodes. There's still some people reported issues and. So what is headless WordPress? This is definitely a trend these days with tools like Gatsby. Have you guys heard about Gatsby? Now it's a very exciting time for React because the ecosystem is growing so fast, and now you have tools like Gatsby or Next.js where now you can render React on the back end. That a lot of companies are reworking the entire content, their content networks, and creating what they call the content mesh. So some of their sites might be a WordPress site, some of their sites might be a Gatsby site, some sites might be a headless WordPress installation, another site might be. So right now, just that separation of concerns is working. It seems to be working very well for a lot of companies. So decoupling parts of your application for better architecture and performance allows for cloud-based architecture. So now you can easily deploy to AWS, Google Cloud, things like DigitalOcean. Now you can integrate Vue, React, Angular applications as a WordPress page. And I heard that this is a very popular setup for large advertising agencies, that they recommend this a lot to their clients. Any questions about headless WordPress? You kind of see the benefit, right? So you have very solid. One thing about WordPress is that everybody knows it and people feel very comfortable because it's using it, because it's years and years of user experience testing that have built that backend UI for people. So when people hear WordPress, like, oh yeah, you want to update the blog, just go to login in here, here's your username and your password, and they can go to the backend. They feel very comfortable building it. Well, if you try to recreate that UI, that backend UI yourself, is going to be tough. A lot of the earlier static site generators like Jekyll, for example, require you to have a little bit of technical skills. You have to deploy using Markdown. So a lot of, especially if you, like people like me that has to work with marketers, there's a barrier to entry right there. Now you have to explain what a Markdown file is to a marketing manager. While if you choose tell them, hey, here's your password, here's your username, go to WordPress and write your article, put your article in there. And then through the API, then you feed that into your front end. Yeah, so the New York Times, TechCrunch, Forbes, Bloomberg, Times Magazine use WordPress for the editorial products. Is anybody here? Is your company using WordPress for anything? Yeah, yeah. But it's mostly content, right? Agency. Okay. Yeah. One thing about WordPress is you don't really use WordPress to build a product. For example, startups they have the capital and the money to do something from scratch, right? And they don't want to invest on something like PHP that they consider insecure and old. And so when it comes to the job market, there's definitely, especially for new developers, PHP and WordPress have like a really bad rap. But there's still a lot of jobs out there, and it's a great way for you to get your foot on the door.
So are you saying that with the React, the server-side JavaScript that's in Gutenberg or the latest WordPress update, that you could actually just write JavaScript server-side code instead of
Exactly.
PHP?
Pretty much.
Yes.
And then, so new developers, they wouldn't have to learn PHP.
Exactly.
There's a little bit of PHP that you still
Yeah,
have to
it's
learn.
still running in the browser. It's just running in the back end. So
Mhm.
the
Server
content
side.
authors are using a different set of JavaScript than the front end, and it is pretty clever about the way it actually generates HTML.
I got you. But you're not writing like the templates and stuff in JavaScript. You would still use those. You'd still make those in PHP, right?
Yeah, you still have to use the WordPress plugin API. A little bit of that. That's where kind of, that's when I have to ruin the party. But yeah, we'll go over that really quick. So modern workflows. A lot of people that go to boot camps or that start learning JavaScript, they're not only learning JavaScript, but they're learning entire workflows, right? Things like Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, Posso, integrating that into a repository, GitHub, Git deployments, testing, Circle, what is it called? Circle, CI, Travis. So you're building like a pretty robust workflow for whatever you're doing. Right now, out of the box, that's very tough to do with WordPress, but there are communities out there that have built frameworks that would allow you to do that. Now there is a framework called Roots. Has anybody heard of Roots? It's a pretty solid framework for WordPress. We'll go over that in a few minutes. You got a question? Okay. So yeah, you could use Blade. You could use some of these frameworks. Use Mustache, Pug, which used to be Jade, right? Pug, yeah. And then it would allow you to actually build a build process that will give you the optimized assets for the front end. Right now, out of the box, if you build a theme, those assets are not optimized. You're serving all that stuff the way it is. You're dumping all of that CSS files, all of that HTML, all of that JavaScript, unminified, unoptimized to the front end. You can't use Sass, for example, out of the box with WordPress. You have to write plain CSS. So Roots.io, here it is. All right, so Roots.io is composed of three products. It's called, one of them is Sage, Bedrock, and Trellis. Bedrock basically turns your WordPress into a more app-like architecture. So it pretty much makes it look like a Rails app. So you have a this folder, you have a source folder, you have an app folder, and it just makes it easier for people like you guys that come from a modern workflow to get along with the architecture a little bit better. It makes it a little bit more secure as well. So you install Bedrock, now you have a app-like WordPress installation. Then on top of that, then you can run Sage, which is a framework to develop themes in WordPress. So data in WordPress lives in the database, and then you can have themes which is basically what you deploy into the front end. Sage uses Webpack. You can use Sass. So it's a pretty solid modern front end development workflow.
Are those all independent projects?
They are part of like the same family, but yeah, I think they are independent projects. I used all three of them at the same time.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, those weren't developed by the main.
Oh no, this is developed by a different the community thing. Yeah, it's open source. They do have some paid products, but this is like their foundation product basically. It's called Roots.
So So on top of WordPress, in that WordPress framework, there's also the Laravel framework that powers Roots, and then the other frameworks like Sage and Bedrock and Trellis.
Yeah, so Sage, you can use Blade templates, which is like a Laravel thing, but that's for Sage. So that's for your themes. And then for Trellis, what Trellis is server provisioning. So you run a virtual machine, and then you develop on that virtual machine, and then you can deploy directly to AWS or DigitalOcean. And so pretty solid. Still know a lot of WordPress developers that deploy through FTP. So they make a change in the CSS file, they go back to their folder, then drag the CSS file to the other window, and so this is basically command line deployments.
And that's just for development, not for the actual site.
That's for the. What do you mean by that?
I mean, like visiting the site, because it seems like there's a lot of frameworks on top of each other.
Yeah. So Bedrock is basically just WordPress. Bedrock is WordPress. It's just a different folder architecture, basically. Sage is what you will use to develop your theme. So once you install Bedrock, that's it. You don't have to run npm start or anything. It's just there. Now for Sage, you do have to do npm start, and that builds your hot reloading and all the SAS and is watching your PHP, is watching your HTML, your JavaScript, is watching all your files. It compiles them, and then when you're good to go, then you can do npm build, and that's what you end up deploying to the front end. When you're ready to send this to a staging environment, into a remote staging environment, let's say in DigitalOcean, then you go to your command line and say something like, WordPress deployed staging, and it just uploads that image to the, yeah. So everything. So the thing is, you're dealing with the database, you're dealing with WordPress, and then you're dealing with your theme files. With this, everything is synced up at all times. You don't have to deal with these issues. So yeah, container-based deployment. So now you can use Docker. So a lot of you that have used Docker during your coding bootcamp or your during your college program, you can use WordPress with Docker, and there are companies out there that have workflows for this as well. So DigitalOcean, AWS. There is a new hosting company called Convesio, which is optimized for WordPress Docker containers. So once you make this available, there's always companies that will come up with a product to help you out. So Convesio is they're in open beta right now. So I'm interested to see what the product is like. Now imagine that you have, you're incorporating 2-3 developers into your team. Now they all have to have local copies of your site. By using container technology, that's really easy to do. Previously, now you have to worry about importing the database, and then getting the database from production, and then syncing it with. So it's a whole different workflow, old school. Any questions about this so far?
Are there any race conditions or anything like that with that kind of orchestration? Or
Any what?
race conditions or something like that? If like multiple people are working on the same copies of something, and they save it to their local database and their local Docker image, and they push it up.
Yeah, the database is always tough. The good thing is that when you're developing for WordPress, when you're actually writing code and building these themes as a developer, because there's a lot of people out there that build themes with site builders, you're only touching a very specific folder, and that's the themes folder. So what is going on with the core or the database is not your problem. Nothing should interfere with the data. You're working on the front end. Now, if you're building plugins that have to touch the database to save options, and that's when things can get a little complicated. But I'm going to get to that. There is a tool called Composer, which would allow you to manage your plugins just like you will do with npm, for example. It's a PHP package manager. So there it is. So WP CLI is a great tool. It will literally just allow you to make changes to your WordPress without having to log in and go to the backend and click on the sidebar and go to plugins and then activate the plugin. You could do all this through the command line. One of the most terrifying things, and I had taught web development before, is that black screen, command line interface. That's the most terrifying things for people that start to learn how to code. But once you get used to these CLIs, you understand what they're for. They really simplify your workflow. because it's just a bunch of commands. Once you get familiar with the commands there, you kind of memorize them, and you just go, connect to SSH through your remote machine, and you can download plugins, activate, deactivate, update versions of plugins, publish pages, unpublished pages. So it's pretty neat. Now Composer, this is what a lot of the advanced WordPress developers use to manage their plugins. You definitely don't want to be in a situation where you have a content manager going rogue and installing plugins on the production site. So with Composer, you can manage these things and also updating them as well. It will just give you a Composer that, I don't know if a PH file is it? Yeah, and it's just like a package.json file that has all the version of your plugins, and you can kind of keep an eye on things like that. Now it's tough because if you there's a lot of plugins out there that don't have a Composer repository, so now you gotta manage that too. So and of course npm and yarn for your front end. So if you're building blocks with Gutenberg, or if you're building or you're incorporating an actual full React app into your theme, then you could use npm and yarn there. So any questions so far? All right. I hope I'm not scaring you. I'm just trying to make you understand that the WordPress that was is not the WordPress that is now. Things are moving to the right direction, in my opinion. So yeah, WordCamps. WordCamps are great events. They're only $40. Actually, they went up to $50. But it's 3 days. You're not going anymore? Yeah. So the one I went in December last year was in Nashville. In November, it was in Nashville. It was great. The one this past month was in St. Louis. I think they already announced the next one. There's WordCamps in Europe. There's WordCamps in Asia. There's WordCamps in Africa. But yeah, the WordCamp US is in St. Louis, Missouri. And usually the great events, anything you can imagine, all topics from hardcore JavaScript development to marketing, SEO, how to promote your brand, how to start your own business. So it's a very diverse community and very diverse tech conference.
And cheap.
And super cheap. So that's one of the things about the WordPress community is that, and Automatic, is that they do contribute a lot. Like if you want to start your own WordCamp, they'll just give you money for you to start your own WordCamp. So if you want to start a WordCamp in your city, they will help you with that. And there's
They do video everything.
yeah, and then they offer all the conferences online. They publish them on YouTube for everyone to see. The great events.
Are the younger developers filtering in, or can you, like, over time, can you see that the group is just kind of getting older?
Lately I have seen a more balanced kind of age group, because a lot of people that do WordPress for a living are like old and small towners. So something Minnesota, and the guy builds WordPress sites for all the dentists in his county,
Right.
kind of like that. But yeah, I mean, since the whole React-based static site generators, now WordPress and Gatsby are like working closer together to build better headless static options out there. So the WordPress REST API was released in 2015, so it's been a few years since it started. Basically, any WordPress site, you can go and append that to the URL, and then of course the end will be the endpoint, and then you just get a JSON object with all that data. It allows for CRUD operations. We're all familiar with CRUD operations. And it made JavaScript a first-class citizen in the WordPress architecture. And again, it just allows for a lot of options for connectivity and integration. So WordPress has over 19 different APIs. The APIs that you most likely be using is the plugin API and the RESTful API. That's pretty much what you will need to create a basic Gutenberg block. So just very familiar concepts, hooks, right? When I heard about React hooks, I was like, well, I've been using hooks for many years right now. It's same concept. And then part of hooks, you have actions and filters. So actions, hooks, basically what they detect that something happened and trigger some code, and that code could return you data, or it could perform some sort of action. So that's like very crude overview of the WordPress API.
Do you know if those are object-oriented now, or are they still kind of procedural?
I think they're procedural at this point, yeah. So this is pretty much what a WordPress installation will look like. You have your core folders, which you're not supposed to touch. And then your content, which is where everything's going to happen, right? So you have your themes. That's where you can develop themes with Sage, or there's another one called WP Rig, but it uses Gulp for compiling assets. Your plugins. This is where your Gutenberg block is gonna go. This is one of the things that I was like, huh? When Gutenberg was released, I always thought that Gutenberg was going to be embedded in the theme, but you had to actually make it available as a plugin. So you kind of code in a plugin, right?
You can do both.
You could do both, yeah. But and then your uploads folder. One of the most annoying things about WordPress, and this is something that I always end up modifying, is everything you upload to the media library, it gets saved in by date, by month, and so if you have, for example, a company where you're releasing, let's say, an annual report, and you have to replace it, it's just better to keep those assets on his own folder. You could call it, for example, annual report, and that's where you keep your annual reports. But to do that through the media library, there's some modifications that you need to do. And WP config, that's where you can change all the options. That's where you put your database password, your hosts, and all of that. So that's pretty much what the core architecture of WordPress looks like. So now taxonomies. So WordPress works with taxonomies and post types, which is, again, kind of like that legacy blogging platform idea. The default taxonomies are categories and tags. It's just a way for you to categorize and to manage your data. And the post types is where your data is actually going to live. So you have pages, posts, media, maybe there's more. But you could extend this. You could extend this through the WordPress API. You can create your own post types. You can create more taxonomies. And the Gutenberg blog actually needs to use that as well in order to save and to display the data. So why the blog editing experience? It just gave people more freedom inside the editor. And when I first heard about this, it's just alarms went in my head, right? You don't want your clients. You want to limit your clients' ability to change that page as much as possible. If they pay you to create a page where they could choose upload text, that's all they should be doing. You don't want them changing the layout. You don't want them installing plugins. And so there's been a lot of talk about how powerful this editor is, and how in an experienced hands could become a problem eventually. Somebody made the comparison. Remember back in the 90s where you had all this like browser plugins, and you ended up with like a toolbars, exactly, and you ended up with like a fat bar at the top with Alta Vista, Lycos, and all that crap. So right now, that's one of the worries about the blog editing experience. That's just people are just going to start installing things, and then your editor is just going to become a mess, a total mess.
That's what happened anyway, though. If you had people that had a ton of plugins, then that's what they would do to the old editor.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. Pretty much. So there's some talks about how you could organize those editors. There's a product out there, I think, that the editors are like surf from the cloud or something. So yeah, one of the things that you can do with the editor is actually you can create layouts with the editor. So now you can go and say, okay, give me a block that has 3 columns, and I want to put this much information in this column. I want to put an image in this column. So now you're giving design powers to your client. So that could turn into a problem really, really quick. But it's there, and people are using it. As a developer, you could very much lock those options on the editor based on your user profile. So you could when you register as a user, in WordPress, you have editors, you have authors, you have publishers, and you can create more of those as you go. But as a developer, you could also have control over that. So this is interesting. When that whole fiasco happened with React changing, Facebook basically changing the license to, I don't know what it was, but if I understand it correctly, I'm not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice of any kind. But basically what they said was, if you use React on your product, you can never sue Facebook for stealing your idea or something like that. So it created a huge uproar with the developer community, and eventually, like a few days later, they reverted back to a few months, right? Yeah, a few months, yeah. So as part of that, WordPress almost halted the entire blog editing experience. They said we can't have this on our product. It's a huge legal liability for us to have it. So that happened. So how do you consume the WordPress REST API? First, you got to understand the endpoints. There's just too many to cover. You need to understand what you're building. Is what you're building static or dynamic? Static meaning it's just displaying information from the database and it's not writing anything into the database. Or is it dynamic, meaning you're writing from the front end, you can actually write into the database. That's what the difference between dynamic and static. So in a Gutenberg block, you have a state, but it's called attributes. And the way that you update attributes is not with set state, but with set attributes. Normal CRUD operations, there's not much difference there. You can create more endpoints if you want. You can use GraphQL. There's a lot of talks about including GraphQL in WordPress core. I think that will happen eventually. There is a plugin called WP GraphQL or something like that is great. It uses the default authentication for the API is cookie based. So as soon as you log in, now you can create sessions. How are we doing? Okay. Or you can extend it. You can use Okta or Auth0, whatever other authentication plugin but it will require you to install a plugin. So if you want to start experimenting with Gutenberg, there is an npm package that has everything ready for you. It's called Create Gutenblock. You can install it globally, and all you need to do is go to the plugins folder and create a Gutenberg block there. Just create Gutenblock and name it. And what that gives you is a whole, pretty much like a Create React app. It's a Webpack-based workflow. That has a build, has eject, has a run, hot reloading, pretty similar concepts if you've been developing for JavaScript in the past few years. So this is what the file system for Gutenblock looks like. So you have a plugin.php, which is where I think that's where your metadata goes. Then you have your init.php, and that's where you start using the WordPress API to write information to the database and return information to the database. Your blog.js, that's where all your React components are going to go. Your styles, and you're using Sass for that. One question that I had last time I gave this talk was, can I use style components? And the answer is no. You have to have separate Sass files and import them, old school way. So this is what the blog.js file basically does. The state is saved in an object called attributes. Every attribute, every item on that object has to have a type declared, so string, number. You basically have two functions: the save function and the edit function, and that's where your code is going to go. It uses JSX, so if you're familiar with Create React App, it's the same thing. You should use the same JSX formats instead of class name, all that. You can use npm to install components. Styles need to be added via imports, and every time that you see this, basically that WP dot, that's because you're using the API functions. This is one of the ones that you're probably going to use the most, and that's to connect to the RESTful API to get that JSON object. Now you pass the URL, And then you have to have a registered block type. So a lot of what the WordPress does is kind of like enqueues all your files. You have to do a lot of register this, enqueue that, call me this, call that, and all of that is processed on the back end and served to you on the front end. And this is where the party kind of gets boring. So this is when you need to write some PHP in the init.php file. And that's where you enqueue your CSS and your JavaScript. It uses that WP dash syntax, and that means that you're using core WordPress APIs function. And that's where you declare your dependencies. That's where you render the block on the front end, meaning it gets processed on the back end. That's what I meant when I said that you're not loading React on the front end. It's being returned as HTML from the back end. And all of your attributes, meaning the state of your React, is coming as a global variable called attributes. So all of that is already passed into this PHP file as a global variable. So that's kind of how you declare variables in PHP. And then you return your PHP with the PHP echo function. So this is how you install components. There's a lot of components from the WordPress repositories, color picker, pop-ups, tooltips. There's another thing that a lot of people don't know, and that's that WordPress still using Subversion for their repositories. But there is a clone of that exact same code in GitHub. But you can't submit tickets or requests through GitHub. You have to do it through Subversion.
But Gutenberg is in GitHub.
Gutenberg is in GitHub, yes. So what's next? Yeah, that's one of the things that they definitely want to do. They want to move everything to a Git-based repository. So yeah, using GraphQL as a native option for WP blogs. Now you can easily embed a React app into a page or theme. Using WP as a backend for Gatsby, using advanced custom fields to create custom post types and taxonomies. That's that we talked about, separating the app into microservices, so offloading all your media to like AWS and running your front end in I don't know, in another bucket in S. So just having like different apps talking to each other, basically. This is interesting. So as React is becoming so ubiquitous, and the React framework or library, it's a library, right, of choice for building backends, you could take potentially, in theory, take the code from a Gutenberg blog and run it through some sort of transformer, and now install it in Gatsby, or install it in, let's say, a MailChimp editor. So that's one of the things that they talked about when they launched Gutenberg, which is making blocks like this universal unit that you could port everywhere. Interesting concept, right? If it's using JavaScript. So, and then some of the next steps for Gutenberg is using Gutenberg for everything on your theme. So the header, the footer, use sidebar. Right now, you just confined to that content area. So in your theme, you have a page.php file, and there is an area called content, and that's where Gutenberg is working on the back end. That's where Gutenberg gets inserted. Now, what they want to do is everything. You could put Gutenberg blocks everywhere you want. So that's it. Thank you, guys. I hope that you give this a try. Definitely look at roots.io. Give WordPress a run. Download the latest version, 5.3. You want to run it through something like WAMP or MAMP for Macs. That's cool too. But if you want to, apply some of your modern skills, try it with Docker. It's pretty cool.
Does it have any Nginx support?
Yes. Yes. So you have any questions? You want to use WordPress? Yeah. Thank you.
So who's got some questions?
It's a global corporate site, but because the company has presence in all these different countries, they wanted to make custom content available for that specific country. So we have a network of sites, which is something that WordPress allows, is a multi-site installation. So it's directory based. So you go to acom.com, then that's the global site. But if you go to acom.com/UK, now you're going to the UK site, and that site is featuring content that is relevant to that area. So that's why we chose WordPress, because WordPress out of the box offers you the multi-site architecture. It is an editorial syndication platform basically. So I can create content on Universal, and then I can say, okay, syndicate to the UK, to Saudi Arabia, to Greece, to Hong Kong, and then hit publish, and then that content gets syndicated to those sites.
So with the headless, have you done some of those? Is this something you have experience like actually deploying, or like? So my concern with that is the UX experience, because one of the reasons that WordPress comes up a lot is that people request it, people understand it, they know it, and then once you've broken it into headless, the workflow of write in the WordPress backend and preview it is completely different.
Correct.
So have you dealt with that from a human point of view?
So we have a kind of like a local internal WordPress, full WordPress, where they can actually preview what they're doing, and when they're happy and done with their changes, then they send me an email, and then I push those changes to production.
Okay, so you're using it to sort of stage. Okay,
Pretty much.
It's not like actually running a complete like JS front end and then feeding the content in from a WordPress backend.
I am. So what I do, the command that I have, the automated workflow that I have, is to basically rebuild the site on the front end and update all those files. So now they pick up the changes from this WordPress site where they were previewing, and it published into production.
So did you end up double building the front end then? I mean, if you're getting a preview out of WordPress, that's presumably using the conventional themes,
Mhm.
and then if you're sending that off API-wise, you're into some other front end, you've essentially doubled it.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. But the front
That's
end,
what we're trying to avoid.
yeah, exactly. But the front end that we're running internally is not optimized. Like, I don't care how slow that front end is. The one in production is optimized,
Right.
and that's the one where most of my work goes into, in making sure that site is fast, and that it loads, and it loads fast on mobile. And that's the site that we were getting Google Analytics from, and that's where we have all our marketing scripts running, basically.
Arguably, couldn't you just run a staging copy of the front end, and then just have the WP JSON API request from your local server or something like that?
Pretty much.
Is that more feasible? Because then you don't necessarily have to build a theme if you're doing everything over WP JSON.
Right, it's more about the people using it
Yeah.
being able to preview it. And at that point,
I see what
like
you're
there's
saying.
a lot of like internal stuff that they're coming with experience, and they're like, oh, I should be able to click preview and see my site, and then
Right.
if it's got to go out to an API and then get rendered and then spit out some other which way, then it starts to a non-technical user feel broken.
So one of the most challenging parts is how do you, like, yeah, you got this amazing headless WordPress, is super fast and whatever, and now your users work for your company. They're the content managers, so now how you make them happy? They don't want to learn anything. So they used to just going to WordPress, copying and pasting from a Word file, and then uploading the images to the media library and hitting upload. When the first time I started working with static site generators was Jekyll. And that was a pain too, because now they had to learn how to write on Markdown. And we had to teach them how to upload images to the server and how to reference them in the Markdown the right way. So I feel that with this headless thing, because WordPress is so popular, it's just scary, but still, as people just understand it and eventually they get used to it.
People that are using the headless WordPress, is that performant enough to be, like, do people use that as an origin server, or are they still protecting it, like, really, really heavily with CDNs and caching layers?
There's definitely CDNs and caching layers. When it comes to protecting it, I think that it's just static files, so there's nothing for you to hack, really, right? So I know that, for example, with Gatsby, like if they want to add some sort of discussion board, then they will use something like Discuss. They wouldn't try to plug into the main, database with that. Any other questions?
Questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, recommendations, critiques, limericks?
WordPress has a pretty good Slack. Is this covered on the Slack? Is there a channel?
For this?
Yeah.
No. So I'll probably send you the slides so we can make them available to the group. This is one of those things that you just got to dive in and just try it out on your own. I do have a plug. I'm probably going to be hiring in February. So not right now. I just submitted the job request this morning. So let me know. You're definitely going to be working on WordPress. But the idea is we're looking at traffic and we're identifying which of those like global sites can be broken down into a network of static site generators, basically. That's what we're exploring right now.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Thank you.